What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Seth Rogan stormed off Jimmy Kimmel Live after a brutal confrontation about Hollywood politics and personal integrity that left audiences stunned and social media exploding. The studio audience was buzzing with their usual pre-show energy as Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie and flashed his trademark grin toward the cameras. Tonight's guest was Seth Rogan, the beloved Canadian actor and filmmaker known for his stoner comedies and increasingly vocal political activism. What should have been a light-hearted promotion for Rogan's latest project quickly devolved into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. Rogan walked out to thunderous applause, his signature laugh already filling the studio as he settled into the guest chair. The interview began typically enough, with Kimmel making jokes about Rogan's latest film and his well-documented love of cannabis. The audience laughed along, completely unaware that they were about to witness a television train wreck. "So, Seth, you've been pretty vocal lately about various political issues," Kimmel said, his tone seemingly casual but carrying an undercurrent that Rogan immediately picked up on. "Some people are saying maybe actors should stick to acting. What's your take on that?" Rogan's demeanor shifted slightly, his easygoing smile tightening around the edges. "Well, Jimmy, I think when you have a platform, you have a responsibility to use it, especially when you see injustice happening right in front of you." Right, Kimmel nodded, but his expression suggested he was building toward something. "But don't you think there's a difference between having opinions and, say, publicly attacking other people in the industry? I mean, some of your recent tweets have been pretty harsh toward fellow celebrities who don't share your views." The studio fell noticeably quieter. Rogan leaned forward in his chair, his jovial expression hardening. "I'm sorry, are you referring to when I called out actors who stayed silent during actual humanitarian crises? Because I stand by that completely." Kimmel's smile became more forced. "I'm just saying, maybe there's a way to make your point without throwing people under the bus. Some of us have been in this business a long time and understand that relationships matter." "Relationships matter?" Rogan's voice rose slightly. "You mean like your relationship with Harvey Weinstein? Because I remember you being pretty quiet about that situation until it became impossible to ignore." The audience gasped audibly. Kimmel's face flushed red, and the atmosphere in the studio became electric with tension. "That's completely unfair, Seth. We all learned about Harvey at the same time everyone else did." "Did you, though?" Rogan shot back, no longer attempting to maintain any pretense of friendliness. "Because there are photos of you at his parties, Jimmy. There are receipts. And while people were getting hurt, you were making jokes and cashing checks." Kimmel stood up abruptly, his hands visibly shaking. "I think we need to take a commercial break." "No, let's keep going," Rogan said, also rising from his chair. "Let's talk about how you've built your career on punching down at people while protecting the real predators in this industry. Let's talk about your fake woke persona while you've been complicit in a system that destroys people." The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Cameras continued rolling as both men faced each other, the pretense of a friendly late-night chat completely shattered. "You don't know what you're talking about," Kimmel said through gritted teeth. "You're out of line." "Am I? Or am I just saying what everyone else is too scared to say? You've spent years positioning yourself as this moral authority, this champion of progressive causes, but where were you when it actually mattered? Where were you when your friends were hurting people?" Kimmel's mask was completely off now, his famous affability replaced by raw anger. "You know what, Seth? Maybe you should worry about your own house before you start burning down everyone else's. Glass houses and all that." The threat was barely veiled, and Rogan's eyes flashed dangerously. The tension in the room was so thick it was almost suffocating, and everyone present knew they were watching something unprecedented unfold in real time. "Is that a threat, Jimmy?" Rogan asked, his voice deadly quiet now. "Because if you've got something to say about me, say it. But don't you dare try to deflect." From your own complicity by making vague insinuations. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to catch in his throat as he realized just how far this had escalated. With millions watching and cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming a career-defining disaster. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out strained and defensive. You know what, Seth? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You come on my show, accept my hospitality, and then launch into these conspiracy theories and personal attacks. This is why people think actors should stick to making movies. Rogan let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the stunned studio. Conspiracy theories? Jimmy, these aren't theories. These are documented facts. Photos don't lie. Guest lists don't lie. Your silence during the biggest scandal in Hollywood. History doesn't lie. I was never silent, Kimmel protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I addressed it when appropriate. When appropriate? Rogan's voice dripped with disdain. When it became profitable to do so, you mean? When the public opinion shifted, and it was safe for you to pile on. But where were you when Rose McGowan was being blacklisted? Where were you when Ashley Judd was being threatened? You were making jokes about grabbing women by the pussy while actual women were being grabbed. The studio audience was completely frozen, some covering their mouths in shock. This was far beyond anything they had ever witnessed on a talk show. Several audience members had their phones out, clearly recording what they knew was television history in the making. Kimmel's face was now bright red, sweat beading on his forehead under the hot studio lights. That's enough. This interview is over. No, Jimmy, we're just getting started, Rogan said, stepping closer to the desk. Let's talk about your relationship with Les Moonves. Let's talk about all those industry parties where you rubbed shoulders with people who were systematically abusing their power. Let's talk about how you've spent years virtue signaling while being part of the problem. Security, Kimmel called out, his voice cracking slightly. But no one moved. The entire crew seemed paralyzed by the magnitude of what they were witnessing. You can call security all you want, Rogan continued relentlessly. But millions of people are watching this right now. They're seeing who you really are behind that fake concerned liberal facade. They're seeing that when someone calls you out on your complicity, your first instinct is to silence them rather than address the accusations. Kimmel slammed his hand down on his desk, causing his coffee mug to jump and spill. These are lies, baseless accusations from someone who's clearly lost touch with reality. Lost touch with reality? Rogan's voice rose to match Kimmel's volume. The reality is that you built your career on the backs of vulnerable people while pretending to be their champion. The reality is that you've been exposed as a fraud, and instead of owning up to it, you're trying to gaslight me and everyone watching. The cameras continued to roll as both men stood facing each other across the desk. The veneer of civilized discourse completely shattered. In the control room, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this historic meltdown continue. You want to talk about reality, Seth? Kimmel's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. The reality is that you're here promoting a movie that's going to bomb because nobody wants to hear your sanctimonious preaching anymore. The reality is that you've alienated half your fan base with your political grandstanding. The reality is that you're a washed-up stoner who thinks smoking weed makes him some kind of moral authority. The personal attack hit its mark, and Rogan's expression darkened further. At least I'm not a corporate sellout who built his career on other people's suffering. At least I don't pretend to care about causes while taking money from the very people perpetrating the crimes. That's it, Kimmel shouted, pointing directly at Rogan. Get off my stage. Get out of my studio. This interview is over. But Rogan didn't move. Instead, he turned to face the audience directly, his voice carrying clearly through the studio's sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when you confront the entertainment industry's complicity in abuse and exploitation. This is how they react when their comfortable lies are exposed. The audience sat in stunned silence, many still recording on their phones while others looked around nervously, unsure whether they should applaud, boo, or simply leave. The atmosphere in the studio had become suffocating, charged with an energy that felt dangerous and unpredictable. Kimmel's face had gone from red to an alarming shade of purple. "You have no right to grandstand in front of my audience. This is my show, and I'm telling you to leave." "Your show?" Rogan spun back around to face him, his voice now booming through the studio. "This isn't your show, Jimmy. This is a public platform that you've been using to manipulate people while hiding your own dirty secrets. These people deserve to know who they're really supporting when they tune in every night." Security guards finally began moving toward the stage, but Rogan held up his hands, signaling he wasn't going to resist physically. However, his verbal assault continued unabated. "You want to know what's really disgusting? It's not just that you stayed silent. It's that you actively helped cover things up. Remember that charity auction where you helped raise money for Weinstein's legal defense fund? Because I do." Kimmel's eyes widened in panic. "That never happened. You're making things up." "Am I?" Rogan pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Because social media remembers everything, Jimmy. Every photo, every tweet, every cozy dinner party where you laughed it up with predators while their victims suffered in silence." The studio crew was frozen in place, torn between their professional obligations and the historic nature of what they were witnessing. In the control room, phones were ringing off the hook as network executives demanded to know what was happening and why the feed hadn't been cut. "You're done in this town," Kimmel screamed, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. "I'll make sure you never work again. You have no idea who you're messing with." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Rogan's expression shifted from anger to something approaching pity. And there it is, the real Jimmy Kimmel, not the concerned liberal, not the champion of the downtrodden, but a vindictive Hollywood power broker who destroys anyone who threatens his carefully constructed image. Several audience members gasped audibly at Kimmel's naked threat. The mask had completely slipped, revealing the ugly reality beneath the carefully cultivated persona. Phones continued recording, capturing every word for posterity. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Kimmel continued, his voice shaking with rage. "But you're just a self-righteous hypocrite who's jealous of people who actually made it in this business without having to resort to pathetic attention-seeking stunts." "Attention-seeking?" Rogan laughed bitterly. "Jimmy, I didn't come here to destroy you. I came here to promote a movie. But when you started lecturing me about staying in my lane while you've been running interference for abusers, I couldn't stay quiet. That's the difference between us. I actually have principles." The security guards were now flanking Rogan, but they seemed reluctant to physically remove him while he wasn't being violent. The entire situation had spiraled so far beyond normal protocol that no one seemed to know how to handle it. Kimmel pointed a shaking finger at Rogan. "Principles? You call destroying someone's career over unsubstantiated allegations principles? You call ruining someone's reputation principles? Unsubstantiated?" Rogan's voice rose again. "Everything I've said can be verified. Every connection I've mentioned is documented. Every silence I've called out is a matter of public record. The only thing that's been destroyed here tonight is your credibility, and you did that yourself." The audience was completely silent now, watching this unprecedented meltdown with a mixture of fascination and horror. Many were already posting clips to social media, where the confrontation was beginning to trend worldwide. "Get him out of here!" Kimmel shouted to security, his voice cracking with desperation. "Now!" But Rogan stepped back from the guards and raised his hands again. "Don't worry, I'm leaving. But not because you're kicking me out. I'm leaving because I refuse to share a stage with someone who built their career on the suffering of others while pretending to be their champion." He turned back to the audience one final time, his voice calm but carrying clearly through the stunned studio. "When you go home tonight, look up everything I've mentioned. Don't take my word for it. Don't take his word for it. Look at the facts. And decide for yourselves who's telling the truth." With that, Rogan began walking toward the exit, his steps measured and deliberate. The security guards followed at a distance, unsure of their role now that he was leaving voluntarily. But Kimmel wasn't finished. His desperation and rage had reached a boiling point, and he couldn't let Rogan have the last word. "Run away, Seth!" Kimmel shouted after him, his voice echoing through the studio. "That's what you always do when someone calls you out on your bullshit. You're a coward and a fraud, just like everyone else who hides behind social media activism." Rogan stopped dead in his tracks, his back still to Kimmel. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see if he would turn around for one final exchange. Slowly, deliberately, he pivoted to face the host one last time. "You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am running away. I'm running away from a toxic industry that protects predators and punishes those who speak out against them. I'm running away from people like you who build careers on false righteousness while enabling the very behavior you claim to oppose." His voice grew stronger as he continued, projecting to every corner of the studio. "But the difference between us is that I'm running toward something better. I'm running toward accountability, toward truth, toward a world where victims don't have to suffer in silence while their abusers get standing ovations." Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Rogan cut him off with a gesture. "And as for being a coward," Rogan's voice took on a steel edge. "A coward is someone who stays silent when they could speak up. A coward is someone who protects their career over protecting victims. A coward is someone who threatens to destroy others when their own actions are exposed." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Every eye was fixed on the two men. Every phone was recording. Every breath was held in anticipation of what would come next. Kimmel's face had gone pale, the fight seeming to drain out of him, as the weight of his own words and actions settled over him like a suffocating blanket. I never," he stammered, but the words died in his throat. "You never what, Jimmy? Never knew? Never participated? Never benefited?" Rogan shook his head sadly. "The evidence speaks for itself. The photos speak for themselves. Your silence spoke for itself." With that final condemnation hanging in the air, Rogan turned and walked toward the exit. This time, Kimmel made no attempt to stop him or shout after him. The host simply stood behind his desk, visibly shaking, as the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. As Rogan reached the studio doors, he paused and looked back one final time, not at Kimmel, but at the audience that had witnessed this unprecedented confrontation. "Thank you for listening," he said simply. "And remember, the truth doesn't care about ratings or careers or reputations. It just is." The heavy studio doors swung shut behind him with a resounding thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or simply leave. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel's shell-shocked expression as he realized his career had just imploded on live television. Finally, one of the producers off-camera called out weakly, "We'll be right back after these messages," and the show cut to commercial. But the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire. The hashtag #KimmelExposed began trending worldwide as viewers shared their reactions to what many were calling the most explosive moment in late-night television history. In the aftermath, as the studio audience filed out in stunned silence, many were already posting their footage online. The confrontation would be dissected, analyzed, and debated for weeks to come. Kimmel's reputation lay in ruins, his carefully constructed image shattered beyond repair by his own words and actions during those fateful minutes. Seth Rogan had walked into that studio to promote a movie, but he walked out having exposed one of Hollywood's most prominent figures as a fraud. The entertainment industry would never be quite the same, and neither would late-night television. The truth, as Rogan had said, simply was.